So, the title of my talk today is called Protecting an Open Heart. But first, I really want to thank you for being here. Gives me somebody to talk to. And in my talk last month, if you were around, we began exploring the 10 Pāramīs, the qualities of heart that are gradually cultivated and brought to maturity on the path to awakening. It takes a while to go over all of these, but I'd like to just share the 10 states of mind, the qualities or the behaviors that, according to the Buddhist teachings, lead to peace and can be cultivated well by householders, those of us that are non-monastic. And they're interrelated with each other, and they're very fluid, flowing in and out of each other. So I'm just going to give you a minimal, short description of each one and speak about them over the course of the next few months, a series of several talks. Generosity, having a willingness to open to all things, to share with others and contemplate abundance. Sila, being willing to live harmoniously with others and to undertake the training to live within the 5 precepts. Renunciation, cultivating the capacity to abandon our attachments, watching them naturally let go. Wisdom, being able to see or consider the implications of the 3 characteristics: anicca, impermanence; anatta, no solid sense of self; and dukkha, understanding the dissatisfaction that we feel in most experiences. Energy, that's the 5th one, our level of willingness to participate in mental development. And patience, cultivating the capacity to stop our resistance to the truth of an experience. Truthfulness, paying attention to truthfulness of our words and of our actions. And resolution or resolve, the degree in which we are willing to follow our aspiration to practice. And the last 2 are loving kindness, willingness to connect and care about other sentient beings. Equanimity is the last, being willing to consider phenomenon outside of our opinions and our judgments. So I began in July with generosity. And we looked at generosity not simply as giving money or possessions, but as a way of loosening the heart's tendency to hold on. We can give our attention, we can give our time, we can offer patience, forgiveness, or simply our presence. Each time we give freely, something in the heart opens. And that's really what the Pāramīs are about. They aren't 10 commandments or even 10 qualities that we have to perfect before we can consider ourselves good or good Buddhist practitioners even. They're qualities that already exist within us in some form, seeds perhaps. And practice creates the conditions that allow them to grow. Over time, generosity grows into greater generosity. Patience deepens. Wisdom becomes clearer. Loving kindness becomes more instinctive. Today, we come to the second Pāramī, Sīla. Sīla is usually translated as ethical conduct, morality, or sometimes virtue. And I have to admit that none of those words sound quite as inviting as generosity. Today we're going to talk about morality. That doesn't exactly make everyone lean forward on their chairs. But Sīla is actually something much warmer and more beautiful than the word morality sometimes suggests. If Dana asks, how can I open my heart? Sīla asks, how can I live in a way that protects that open heart? How can the way I speak, the choices I make, and the way I treat other people create less suffering rather than more? And most importantly, what happens inside my own heart when I live with integrity? And that's where I'd like us to begin. When many people first hear the word ethics, they immediately think of rules. Maybe you remember the rules you grew up with. Or perhaps you remember religious traditions where morality was enforced through guilt or fear. Sometimes people are even concerned that Buddhism has its own list of commandments. But that isn't quite how the Buddha approached ethics. The Buddha wasn't interested in creating obedient followers. He was interested in helping people become free. And that changes everything. Ethics in the Buddhist sense isn't about pleasing someone outside ourselves. It's about understanding cause and effect. It's about noticing that some actions leave the heart more peaceful, while others leave it more agitated. One leads toward freedom, the other toward suffering. The Buddha simply invited us to pay attention. The Buddha gives this advice to his young son Rāhula in the middle-length discourses. It has often been called one of the Buddha's greatest teachings on ethical reflection. I went into it a lot in one of my other talks, but you might remember that when his son, the young monk Rāhula, was still a novice, the Buddha didn't begin by giving him a list of commandments. Instead, he offered him a remarkably practical teaching. To sum it up, he said, before you act, ask yourself, will this action lead to harm for myself or others? And if it will not, don't do it. While you're acting, keep watching. If you notice harm arising, stop. And after the action is complete, reflect again. What were the results? This is the heart of ethical practice. It's a training in awareness. It's not blind obedience. I find that deeply encouraging because it means ethics is not something imposed from the outside. It grows from honesty, from paying attention, from having the courage to learn from our experience. In other words, the Buddha trusted that when we look carefully enough, the heart itself begins to recognize what leads toward freedom and what leads toward suffering. I like to think of a garden. Many of us in the Pacific Northwest enjoy gardening. We prepare the soil, plant carefully, water faithfully, and then wait. But if every afternoon someone walks through the garden trampling the seedlings, it doesn't matter how carefully we planted. Nothing has a chance to grow. Generosity is like planting the seeds, and ethics is like tending the garden that generosity has planted. Any of us who have gardened know that planting the seed is only the beginning. The real work is the quiet daily tending. We water, we pull weeds, we protect the tender shoots from slugs or deer. We don't do these things because we want to control the garden. We do them because we love what is trying to grow. Sīla is like that. It isn't controlling ourselves through fear. It's about caring for the conditions in which a wise and compassionate heart can flourish. The Buddha described ethical conduct not as restriction, but as a source of happiness. He was interested in the intentions that shape the heart from within. One of my favorite passages comes from another sutta where the Buddha reminds us that intention lies at the heart of karma. Not simply what we do, but why we do it. This is wonderfully freeing. It means the practice isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware. Again and again, asking ourselves, what is moving me right now? Is this action coming from fear, from greed, from irritation? Or is it coming from kindness, from wisdom, from compassion? That question alone can change an entire conversation. Bhikkhu Bodhi once described Sila as creating a field of harmlessness. I've carried that phrase with me for years. Just let those words settle for a moment. A field of harmlessness. Imagine walking into a room where you immediately sense that no one is trying to impress you, manipulate you, or compete with you. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to measure your words carefully. You simply relax. Now imagine becoming that kind of person for someone else. You become a person whose presence says, without speaking a word, you're safe here. Isn't that one of the greatest gifts we could offer another human being? What an extraordinary gift that is, in a world where so many people are walking on eggshells, trying to guess another person's mood or wondering whether they'll be judged. To become a field of harmlessness may be one of the greatest offerings we can make. And of course, most of us won't do this perfectly. I certainly won't. Neither will you. Every one of us has spoken impatiently. Every one of us has hurt someone we care about. Every one of us has acted from fear instead of wisdom. And that's why the path is built on mindfulness. When we notice we've caused harm, we acknowledge it. We apologize, if appropriate. We learn, and then we can begin again. And that, too, is part of Sila. One of the things that's always comforted me is that the Buddha never expected instant perfection. Again and again, he taught people who struggled, who lost their temper, who became discouraged, who had to begin again. The path was never about never falling. It was about seeing clearly, learning wisely, and continuing with compassion. Maybe that's why Sharon Salzberg's words resonate with me so deeply, with her reminder that we can always begin again. She says that beginning again is not failure. Beginning again is the practice. How many times have we sat down to meditate, noticed that the mind had wandered 100 times, and simply returned to the breath? We don't call that failure. We call it meditation. Why should ethical living be any different? Every moment we notice ourselves drifting away from kindness and gently return. That is the practice. I've noticed in my own life that the harshest voice isn't always someone else's. It's often my own. When I make a mistake, I can become my own worst critic. But that voice has never helped me grow. What has helped is noticing the mistake, taking responsibility where I need to, and then beginning again. Also included is the 5 Precepts, guides for living a harmonious life. What about the 5 Precepts? How many of you know the 5 Precepts? Okay, thank you. The 5 Precepts are the traditional expression of Sīla for lay practitioners, householders like ourselves, rather than monastics. They have a lot more rules, like 297 rules. The 5 precepts are a practice of renunciation. It's generally translated as to refrain from killing, to refrain from taking life that isn't, no, refrain from killing, refrain from taking what isn't really freely given, to refrain from sexual misconduct, to refrain from false speech, to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. But I found that if we think of them merely as rules, we miss their beauty. Each precept is actually protecting something precious. Suddenly, the precepts are no longer about what we're not allowed to do. They become acts of love. They become ways of caring for this fragile, beautiful human life. That's a very different feeling, isn't it? The first precept asks, how do I protect life? Most of us are probably not going through our day struggling with the temptation to kill another human being. So at first this precept can seem rather easy. But protecting life can become a much more intimate practice. Do I notice the small creature sharing this world with me? Do I automatically squash a spider? Or might I find a glass and carry it outside? How do my choices affect animals, other people, and the living earth? And perhaps non-harming includes something even closer to home, the way I treat the person standing in front of me. A harsh word can wound. So can contempt, indifference, or deliberately withholding kindness. The first precept invites us to develop a reverence for life, not only to refrain from destroying it, but to ask, what can I do in this moment to protect and nurture what is alive? If I have time, I'll tell you about my fly trap story, but I'll wait and see. The second precept asks, how do I respect what belongs to another? Traditionally, this is expressed as not taking what has not been freely given. That's sort of a double negative, you know. So take or only take what is freely given. You know, I wonder about that sometimes when there's pens and pencils at the doctor's office or at the bank. I mean, it's offered freely, but nobody says, here, would you like a pen? So I'm just taking it. But anyway, most of us probably aren't planning a bank robbery this afternoon or stealing some clothing off the rack of our favorite store. But this precept becomes much more interesting when we look at the subtle ways that we take. Do we take more than our share? Do I take someone's time for granted? Do I borrow something and neglect to return it? Do I take credit for an idea that wasn't entirely mine? And there's a beautiful positive side to this precept. Instead of simply not taking, we cultivate generosity, fairness, and respect. We begin to recognize that trust is something precious. Every time we respect another person's belongings, time, boundaries, and generosity, we strengthen that trust. The third precept asks, how do I honor relationships and trust? This precept concerns sexual conduct, but underneath it is something much larger. Our responsibility to care for the vulnerability of other human beings. Relationships are places where people can be deeply nourished and deeply hurt. So perhaps the question isn't merely, am I breaking a guideline? A more useful question might be, am I behaving in a way that creates honesty, respect, and safety? Are we clear with one another? Are we respecting commitments? Are we treating another person's heart or body as something precious rather than as something to use for our own gratification? This precept reminds us that love without integrity can cause enormous suffering. And love joined with integrity can become a place of refuge. The fourth precept asks, how do I use speech to heal rather than divide? This is probably the precept that I get the most opportunity to practice. We speak all day long, and now, of course, we don't only speak, we text, we email, we post things online, we forward things before checking whether they're true. A sentence can leave our mouth in 5 seconds and live in someone else's heart for years. So before speaking, perhaps we can occasionally ask these questions that the Buddha suggested. He suggested we ask ourselves, is it true? Is it spoken kindly? Is it the right time? And perhaps most importantly, is it necessary? What is my intention? Am I trying to help or am I trying to win? Sometimes the most ethical speech is courageous truth. Sometimes it's an apology. And sometimes it's simply knowing when not to say the thing we are absolutely dying to say. That, I think, is one of the most predominant things in those 4 ways to speak. Is it necessary? We'd all be a lot more quieter if we really said, is it necessary? Or is it the right time? And then, is it spoken kindly and is it true? So the 5th precept, how do I care for the clarity of this precious mind? Traditionally, this means refraining from intoxicants that lead to heedlessness. I've always liked that word, heedlessness, a reckless lack of care or attention. But I think its wisdom reaches into our modern lives in an interesting way. What clouds my mind? What makes me less present, less discerning, less able to recognize what is happening in my own heart? Certainly alcohol and drugs can do that, but perhaps also we can become intoxicated by anger or endless news or by our phones, by shopping, by entertainment, even by our own opinions. The question isn't simply, what am I allowed to consume? The deeper question is, what supports clarity and what obscures it? Because this mind is the instrument through which we experience our entire life. To care for its clarity is not punishment, it's an act of love. So perhaps the 5 precepts are not 5 restrictions at all. Maybe they're 5 forms of protection. Protecting life. Protecting trust. Protecting relationship. Protecting truth. And protecting the clarity that allows wisdom to grow. Seen in that way, Sila is not keeping us from life. It is one of the ways we learn to care for life. Gil Fronsdale of Insight Meditation Center, you always hear me quote him. It's in California. He sometimes says that ethics isn't simply about avoiding harm. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally inclines toward kindness. I love that distinction. Ethics isn't simply about avoiding harm. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally inclines toward kindness. The goal isn't spending our lives asking, what can I get away with? The goal is becoming someone whose heart has changed so deeply that compassion becomes the obvious response. Not forced, not manufactured, simply natural. Like a healthy tree giving shade. It doesn't decide each morning, I suppose I should shade a few people today. It just expresses its nature. And the Buddha believed our deepest nature could become like that. Just express our deepest nature. Here's a little story. Years ago, someone asked an elderly, experienced meditation teacher, "How will I know if my practice is working?" Want to guess what he said? What they said? The teacher smiled for a long moment before answering. And finally said, "Ask your family." There's a lot of wisdom in that. Our meditation cushions don't really know how enlightened we are. Our family probably has a better idea. Our neighbors, our coworkers, the people who wait behind us in traffic, the cashier who accidentally gives us the wrong change. These are the places where Sila becomes visible. Not because we're trying to impress anyone, but because the heart is gradually becoming less reactive, more patient, more truthful, more trustworthy. And that transformation rarely happens in dramatic moments. It happens one conversation, one decision, one apology, one act of kindness at a time. I'd like to invite you to set aside the ideas for a few moments and not to think about ethics, but simply to experience the heart. So I'm going to give a little guided meditation. If it feels comfortable, allow your eyes to close or simply lower your gaze. Take a slow, easy breath. And another. Let the body settle in to support beneath you. Notice that for these few minutes, there's nowhere you need to go and nothing you need to accomplish. Just this breath. Just this moment. Now gently bring to mind someone you know whose presence feels safe. It may be someone who's living today. It could be someone from a long time ago, or perhaps a teacher you've never met personally. Just notice what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who would never intentionally cause harm. Maybe your shoulders soften. Perhaps your breathing becomes easier. Maybe there's simply a quiet sense of trust. Rest with that feeling for a few moments. Now, if you're willing, let that person fade into the background. Instead, remember a time when you acted from your deepest values. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Perhaps you told the truth when it would have been easier not to. Maybe you apologized. Maybe you chose patience instead of anger. Perhaps you listened carefully to someone who needed to be heard. Or maybe you simply refrained from saying something that would have caused pain. Take a moment to remember one small act of integrity. Notice not only what you did, but how it felt afterward. Was there a little more ease? A little more openness? A little less to defend? This is one of the quiet fruits of Sila. Not pride, not perfection, simply the peaceful feeling of having lived in harmony with your own heart. Now bring to mind someone you may encounter this week. A family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone at the grocery store, or perhaps someone with whom things have been a little difficult. Without trying to solve anything, simply offer this quiet intention. May my words create safety. May my actions build trust. May my heart become a place where others can rest. Let those intentions settle gently into your heart. I'll repeat them. May my words create safety. May my actions build trust. May my heart become a place where others can rest. Let those intentions settle gently into your heart. If your heart is wandering, this breath is a beginning. If you've forgotten your deepest intentions, this breath is a beginning. And perhaps we can carry one simple intention with us. May I become a field of harmlessness wherever I go. May I become a field of harmlessness wherever I go. Let those words rest quietly in the heart. And now I invite you to take one more slow, full breath. Feeling the body sitting here. Feeling the quiet strength that comes from living with integrity. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes and let's continue. As I've practiced with these teachings over the years, I've gradually realized something surprising. Ethical conduct isn't just about making the world a better place, although it certainly does that. It also changes the landscape of our own minds. Every act of kindness, every truthful word, every moment of restraint leaves a quiet imprint. Little by little, we become the person we've been practicing to be. That, to me, is one of the most hopeful aspects of the Buddha's path. We're always being shaped by what we repeatedly choose. There's another aspect of Sila that I find deeply encouraging. The Buddha never suggested that ethical conduct was something that we practiced because someone was watching us. Instead, he invited us to notice something very simple. Every action leaves a trace in the mind. Every action leaves a trace in the mind. Think about a time when you've spoken harshly in anger. Maybe the conversation ended. Maybe the other person never even responded. But afterward, didn't the mind keep replaying it? We rehearse what we said. We justify it. We wished we'd said something different. The conversation is over, yet it continues inside of us. Now think of another moment. Maybe you offered an unexpected kindness, or perhaps you admitted to a mistake. Maybe you apologized before someone asked you to. Notice what happens afterward. The heart becomes lighter. There's nothing to defend, nothing to remember, nothing to hide. That lightness is one of the fruits of Sila. The Buddha described this as the happiness of blamelessness. That's a great phrase. The happiness of blamelessness. A quiet joy that comes from knowing that we've done our best to live with integrity. In one of the suttas, he teaches that ethical living naturally gives rise to freedom from remorse. And from that freedom comes gladness, joy, tranquility, happiness, and a mind that easily settles into meditation. In other words, Sila isn't merely the foundation of the path, it's the beginning of happiness. Meditation isn't separate from how we live. Our conversations become part of our meditation. Our relationships become part of our meditation. Even the way we speak to ourselves becomes part of our meditation. Everything belongs. One of the current day teachers I deeply appreciate, Ayya who is outside of Santa Cruz, she reminds students that the purpose of the precepts is not to make us feel guilty, but to help us live with a heart that is increasingly peaceful. I find that enormously compassionate. Sometimes we think ethics begins with asking, what should I do? But perhaps the deeper question is, what kind of heart do I want to cultivate? What kind of heart do I want to cultivate? If I want a peaceful heart, I learn to speak peacefully. If I want a trustworthy heart, then I practice honesty. If I want a compassionate heart, then I become interested in reducing harm wherever I can. The behavior follows the aspiration. The Buddha never described the precepts as burdens. Again and again, he pointed instead to the freedom that comes from a blameless life and a mind at peace. There's a lovely image from nature that comes to mind. Many of you have walked through the old forests here at the Arboretum at Forest Park, and many of the forests around us, or even some of our city parks like Laurelhurst and Mount Tabor. When you stand among those great cedars or Douglas firs, they don't seem to struggle to remain upright. Their stability comes from roots that have grown quietly underground for decades. We don't admire the roots because we can see them. We admire the tree because of what the roots make possible. Sīla is like those roots. Most people will never notice them. They aren't dramatic. There's no applause for telling the truth, no award for keeping a promise, no headlines because someone chose kindness over retaliation. Yet these quiet choices become the unseen roots of a peaceful life. When the storms come, and they always do, it is those roots that hold us steady. And maybe that's why generosity naturally comes first in the Pāramīs. Generosity opens us to one another. And ethics teaches us to care for that connection. Generosity says, here is my open hand. And ethics says, may these hands never intentionally cause harm. Together they begin to shape a trustworthy human being. Not a perfect human being, a trustworthy one. I don't know about you, but that feels much more attainable. So perhaps this week we might try carrying one small question with us. Did my actions today help my own heart become a little more open and help someone else's heart feel a little safer? If the answer is yes, even once, then the Pāramīs are already growing. The Buddha knew that awakening doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds through thousands of ordinary moments. One generous choice, one truthful conversation, one patient response, one act of forgiveness, one beginning again. This is why I love the image of the tree. No one watches it grow. There's no dramatic moment when it suddenly becomes mature. It simply keeps responding to the conditions of each season, year after year, ring after ring. Its strengths quietly deepen. Perhaps the awakened heart grows in much the same way. The 10 Pāramīs, as you're finding out, are not 10 impossible standards. They're 10 ways of describing what a mature heart looks like. We've explored the first 2 Pāramīs, an open heart and a trustworthy heart. Next time that I teach, sometime in it's again in September on the 29th. Next time we'll discover how that heart learns to let go, to see clearly, and to persevere with courage. Until then, may your practice this week be wonderfully ordinary. May generosity surprise you. May kindness become a little more natural. May your words bring peace. And may you discover again and again that awakening is not somewhere else. It's quietly growing right here in the life you are already living. So as we disperse today, may we remember that awakening is not measured by extraordinary moments, but by the quiet ways we meet ordinary life. May our hands become a little more generous. May our words become a little more truthful. May our acts create safety wherever we go. May we learn to forgive ourselves when we fall short and gently begin again. May our homes become places of kindness. May our communities become places of trust. Thank you for listening to the Dhamma. Let's just sit for a little while and let the words settle down. May our practice continue to open the heart not only from our own well-being, but for the well-being of everyone whose lives we touch. And may the seeds of generosity and integrity that we've reflected on continue to grow season by season into wisdom, compassion, and peace. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings awaken. Thank you for your kind attention and for listening to the Dhamma. May it bring you joy and peace as you move through the rest of your day, and may this practice be of benefit to all beings.